Before the Mongols, the world was 1,000 separate stories. China had never met Europe. Baghdad had never heard of Beijing. Each civilization was the center of its own universe. Each believed it was the pinnacle of human achievement. They were all wrong about each other and about what was coming. In one lifetime, I watched a boy born into nothing take those 1,000 separate stories and stitch them into one. By fire, by blood, by sheer terrifying will. Let me show you the world before him and the world after. The year was 1200. The world had 5 centers of civilization, and they barely knew each other. Song China was the most advanced society on Earth. Paper money, gunpowder, movable type printing, a navy that could put 1,000 ships to sea, a population of 80 million, more than all of Europe combined, and it was dying. The Jin dynasty had taken the north. The Song paid tribute in silk and silver year after year, waiting for the blow that would finish them. The Islamic world was at its intellectual peak. Baghdad housed the House of Wisdom, the largest library on the planet. Persian mathematicians had invented algebra. Arab physicians were performing cataract surgery, while European doctors were still bleeding patients with leeches. The Khwarezmian Empire stretched from the Caspian Sea to the Hindu Kush, rich, confident, utterly convinced of its own permanence. Europe was a backwater. The Crusades had failed. Knights in rusted armor fought each other over strips of French farmland. Rome, once the center of the world, was a city of 30,000 people living in the ruins of an empire that had housed 1 million. They pastured sheep in the Colosseum with no idea what it had been built for. And in between all of this, on a strip of grassland 2,000 miles wide, stretching from Manchuria to Hungary, lived the people nobody considered. The steppe nomads. To the Chinese, they were barbarians who smelled of mutton fat. To the Persians, a nuisance. Raiders who appeared, burned a village, and vanished into grass that had no roads. To the Europeans, they didn't exist at all. No one looked at the steppe and saw an empire. They saw a containment problem. You paid one tribe to fight another. You built walls when they got too close. You waited for them to kill each other, which they always did, always. His name was Temüjin. He was born with a blood clot in his fist. A sign, the shaman said, that he would be a great warrior. They were right. They had no idea how right. His father was poisoned by Tatars when he was 9. Not in battle, at a feast, a truce. The Tatars offered food and the food was poisoned. The clan that had sworn loyalty abandoned his family the next morning. They took the livestock, the horses. They left a woman and 7 children on the frozen steppe with nothing but the clothes on their backs. This is where most stories of great men begin, with a rescue. Temüjin's story begins with his mother digging roots from frozen ground with a stick, with his brothers catching rats and field mice, with a boy learning that the world will kill you if you hesitate. Because at 13, he killed his older half-brother over a fishing dispute. His brother had been hoarding food. Temüjin put an arrow through him. He was captured by a rival clan and enslaved. They put him in a kang, a heavy wooden collar that locked around his neck and wrists. He couldn't feed himself. He couldn't fight. They paraded him from camp to camp as a trophy. At night, they chained him to a cart. He escaped in the dark. When the guards were drunk, he cracked one across the skull with the collar and ran. He hid in a river with only his nose above water, while they searched the banks with torches. They passed within arm's reach. The boy who survived that night would never be captured again. By his 20s, Temüjin had done something no steppe leader had ever accomplished. He built an army of merit. In Mongol tradition, your place in the world was determined by blood, your clan, your lineage. Temüjin abolished that. He promoted men based on loyalty and skill, not birth. A former enemy who fought well was worth more than a blood relative who betrayed him. A shepherd's son who could shoot an arrow through a fist-sized target at full gallop was worth more than a noble who couldn't ride. The men who followed him weren't fighting for tribal pride. They were fighting for him. By 1206, every Mongol tribe was his. The Merkits, the Naimans, the Khwarezms, the Tatars, the people who poisoned his father. He didn't exterminate them, he absorbed them. Their warriors became his warriors. Their women became his people. Their children were raised as Mongols. At a great assembly, a Kurultai, the shamans declared that the eternal blue sky had chosen him to rule the world. They gave him a new name, Genghis Khan, universal ruler, oceanic king. The assembled tribes roared. Nobody understood what they were watching. A unified steppe had never happened before. It was supposed to be impossible. These people had been killing each other for 1,000 years, and the world beyond the steppe didn't even know it had happened. In 1211, Genghis turned south, not to raid, to conquer. The Jin dynasty ruled northern China. 50 million people, walled cities that had never fallen, an army of 500,000 professional soldiers, not tribal levies, iron weapons, siege engine, generations of military doctrine. They had held the northern frontier against steppe nomads for 2 centuries. Genghis had maybe 100,000 horsemen. Most of them had never seen a city larger than 1,000 people. The Jin emperor sent an envoy demanding submission. Genghis turned his back on the envoy, spat on the ground toward the south, and said, "I thought the Jin emperor was chosen by heaven. How could he send a man like you?" Then he rode south. What happened next shouldn't have been possible. The Mongols didn't fight like any army the Jin had ever faced. They didn't form battle lines. They didn't announce their approach. They moved in units of 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, each with commanders who could act independently, each trained to exploit any opening without waiting for orders. The decimal system. Every Mongol unit was a self-contained war machine, and they communicated across the battlefield with flags by day and torches by night. Orders traveling faster than any enemy could react. They took border forts by pretending to retreat, drawing the garrison out, then circling behind and slaughtering them in open ground. They took walled cities by capturing Chinese engineers and forcing them to build siege engines, catapults, battering rams, towers that rose higher than the walls they were attacking. They learned from everyone they conquered. That was the pattern. Every civilization they destroyed made them stronger. Beijing fell in 1215. The Jin emperor fled south. Genghis didn't stay to rule. He took silk and gold and engineers, especially the engineers, and moved on. The Jin were done. The Mongols had dismantled the greatest military power in East Asia in 4 years. And here is what the rest of the world should have noticed, but didn't. Genghis Khan had just conquered a settled empire of 50 million people. Something no steppe nomad had ever done. The Huns hadn't done it. The Turks hadn't done it. It was supposed to be impossible. The Jin should have been safe behind their walls, behind their numbers, behind their centuries of civilization. They weren't. And yet, to the west, no one was paying attention. The Khwarezmian Empire stretched from the Caspian Sea to the mountains of Afghanistan. It was young, barely a generation old, and bursting with arrogance. Samarkand, Bukhara, Urgench. Cities of blue tile and green gardens. Libraries that held books in Arabic, Persian, Greek, and Sanskrit. A Shah who commanded 400,000 soldiers. Walls that had never been breached. The Khwarezmians had heard rumors of a steppe warlord conquering the east. But China was far away. China was weak, they told themselves. China had always fallen to nomads eventually. The Jin themselves were steppe people who had gone soft. That was the cycle of history. Nomads conquer, settle, grow fat, get conquered by the next wave. The Khwarezmian Empire was not China. It was the crossroads of the world. They were wrong about what they were facing. This was not a cycle of history. This was something new. In 1218, Genghis sent a trade caravan to the Shah. 500 camels loaded with treasure, a message of peace. He had China to digest. He wanted trade, not war. The governor of Otra seized the caravan. He was the Shah's uncle. He looked at 500 camels of gold and silk and jade and decided that a steppe warlord had no right to such wealth. He killed the merchants, stole everything. Genghis sent 3 envoys, 2 Mongols and 1 Muslim, a gesture of respect. Their message was simple: punish the governor, return the goods. This can end here. The Shah killed the Muslim envoy, the chief envoy. Then he shaved the beards of the 2 Mongols, a mortal insult, and sent them back with the severed head of their companion. In Mongol belief, an envoy carried the protection of the eternal blue sky. To harm an envoy was to declare war on heaven itself. Genghis climbed a sacred mountain and prayed for 3 days. When he came down, he gave one order: the golden rain has loosened, the rains of vengeance. 100,000 horsemen rode west. They crossed the Tian Shan mountains in winter. Horses died, men died. The ones who survived were riding toward a man who had murdered their merchants, killed an envoy, and insulted their Khan. They wanted to be there. Otra fell first. The governor who had started the war was captured alive, dragged from the citadel where he had hidden while his men fought and died. Genghis had silver melted in a crucible, molten silver, poured into the governor's eyes and ears. You stole my silver, here it is. It was not cruelty, it was symmetry. Samarkand fell in 5 days. The Shah had more soldiers across his empire, far more, but they were in cities. The Mongols appeared outside those cities before the Shah's commanders knew they had crossed the border. They moved faster than rumor. By the time a city lit its warning beacons, the Mongols were already inside the walls. The Shah fled west. Genghis sent 2 generals after him, Subutai and Jebe, names that would become legends, 2 of the greatest military minds in history. They pursued him across Persia, through mountains and deserts, never stopping. The Shah died on a small island in the Caspian Sea, alone, stripped of empire, stripped of everything. But Subutai and Jebe didn't stop. The Shah was dead. They kept riding. Their orders were to scout. That was the word, scout. 20,000 men each riding west to see what was there. Permission to engage if necessary. Permission to learn. What they learned was that the Caucasus was not a barrier, it was a road. Georgia fell. The Cumans, steppe nomads themselves, tried to fight and were shattered. They fled west to their allies, the Russian princes, and begged for help. The princes of Russia assembled, Kiev, Chernigov, Galicia. They didn't trust each other, but a common enemy from beyond the known world was enough to unite them. They gathered 80,000 men, No one invaded Russia in winter. Napoleon failed at it 600 years later. Hitler failed at it 700 years later. The Mongols did it in 1223 and won. Their horses dug through snow to find grass. Their soldiers wore silk so tight that arrows couldn't penetrate, and winter became an ally. At the Kalka River, Subutai had 20,000 men against 80,000. He pretended to retreat for 9 days, drawing the Russians across the steppe, exhausting them, letting heavy cavalry sink into spring mud. When he finally turned, they weren't facing a battle. They were facing a trap. The Russians lost. The captured princes were executed in Mongol fashion, laid on the ground covered with planks, and the commanders feasted on top of them. "We won't even grant you death in battle." This was not cruelty. This was a message. We are not like you. Your rules don't apply. Genghis Khan died in 1227, fell from his horse during a campaign against the Tangut kingdom. By then, his empire stretched from the Pacific to the Caspian, the largest contiguous empire in human history, and it wasn't finished. His son Ögedei became Great Khan. If anything, it accelerated. In 1237, the Mongols returned to Russia. Not scouting this time. Annihilation. Batu Khan, Genghis's grandson, led the invasion. Ryazan held for 5 days. When it fell, every living thing inside the walls was killed. Vladimir fell in 6. Suzdal was burned with its defenders inside the cathedral. Women, children, priests, all of them. The Mongols didn't distinguish between soldiers and civilians because, in their view, everyone who resisted was an enemy. Kiev, the mother of Russian cities, fell in 9 days. Of 50,000 inhabitants, 2,000 survived, and the Mongols kept moving west. The Knights of Hungary assembled, the Knights of Poland, the Teutonic Order, the most feared heavy cavalry in Europe. Batu Khan destroyed them at Mohi on April 11, 1241. The same day, a second Mongol army destroyed the Poles and Teutonic Knights at Legnica. 2 armies, 2 battles, 2 kingdoms. One day, Ögedei Khan was dead. 5,000 miles away in Karakorum, a Khan drank himself to death. Mongol law required all princes of the blood to return for the election of a successor. The army in Europe turned back. Europe was saved not by its armies, not by its walls, not by its god. It was saved by alcohol and succession law on the other side of the world. The wave paused. It didn't stop. It never stopped. In 1258, Hulagu rode into Mesopotamia with perhaps 150,000 men, the largest Mongol army ever assembled. His target, Baghdad, the center of the Islamic world. 500 years of the Abbasid Caliphate, the city where mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy had been preserved and advanced while Europe was burning witches. The Caliph, Al-Mustasim, refused to surrender. He threatened Hulagu with the wrath of God. He warned that the entire Muslim world would rise against the Mongols if Baghdad was touched. Hulagu's response has survived 800 years. He wrote, "God has already given us dominion over the earth. You are next." Baghdad fell in 13 days. The caliph was rolled in a carpet and trampled by horses. Mongol tradition, no royal blood could touch the ground. 53 years. From an outcast boy uniting steppe tribes to his grandson erasing the greatest city in the Islamic world. Within a generation, Kublai Khan would conquer Song China. 1 out of every 4 human beings on earth would live under a Mongol Khan. The Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. For the first time in human history, a single authority controlled the entire Silk Road, 6,000 miles from the Yellow Sea to the Mediterranean. And the Mongols understood something that empires often forget. Trade creates wealth. Wealth creates loyalty. Under the Mongols, a traveler carrying a paisa, a metal tablet stamped with the Khan's seal, was untouchable from one end of the empire to the other. You could ride from Hangzhou to Venice and no one would stop you. No tolls, no bandits. Relay stations every 25 miles, the Yam system, with fresh horses, hot food, armed guards. This was the first global postal system. Marco Polo estimated 10,000 relay stations with 200,000 horses. A message could travel from Beijing to Baghdad in 2 weeks. Ideas moved faster than armies ever had. Gunpowder traveled west along these roads. Paper money, the compass, movable type printing, Chinese medical texts describing techniques Europe wouldn't discover for centuries. At Kublai's court, Persian astronomers ran the imperial observatory. Muslim cartographers drew maps that included China and Europe for the first time. When Marco Polo arrived in 1275, he found a court where a Venetian merchant could sit with a Chinese mandarin, a Persian mathematician, and a Mongol general, and all could communicate. The Mongols had become what they destroyed. Patrons of a connected world, the intellectual foundation of the Renaissance was laid not in Florence, but in Karakorum and Khanbalik. Europe would get the credit. The Mongols did the work. But connection has a cost. Every road that carries silk also carries rats. In the 1330s, reports reached Europe of a sickness in the east. A plague, faster and deadlier than anything recorded in human memory. It traveled along the trade routes the Mongols had opened and the relay stations they had built. The very system that connected the world was now connecting death. By 1346, the plague reached the Black Sea. The Golden Horde was besieging Kaffa, a Genoese trading port in Crimea. Plague broke out in the Mongol camp. Men were dying faster than arrows could kill them. So the Mongols loaded infected corpses into catapults and launched them over the walls. The first recorded act of biological warfare. The Genoese fled by ship to Italy. They didn't know they carried anything but their lives. The Black Death killed between 75 and 200 million people. A third to half of Europe. It killed more than every Mongol conquest combined. More than any war in human history before or since. And it traveled along roads Genghis Khan had opened. The Pax Mongolica connected the world. The connection nearly destroyed it. The empire fragmented. Kublai's Yuan dynasty fell to the Ming in 1368. The Mongols driven back to the steppe. The Golden Horde in Russia lasted 250 years until Moscow absorbed it and used it as its own imperial blueprint. The grandsons of Genghis turned on each other. The same unity he forged with blood, they destroyed with pride. And yet, before Genghis Khan, China and Europe were separate planets, different technologies, different immune systems, different futures. After Genghis Khan, they were the same planet, connected by roads he cut with a sword, unified by a system built on ashes, the gunpowder that ended castles, the paper that carried the Renaissance, the postal system in your government. The very idea that the world could be connected, all of it traces back to the steppe, to one man, to the century that tore the world apart and stitched it back together. The world was small before the Mongols. Whether that was better, that's not for me to say. If you made it this far, you've traveled through the Mongol century with someone who was there. I've told you what the century looked like from the inside. The blood, the fire, the impossible speed of it. What stayed with you? The boy starving on the frozen steppe? The silver poured into a thief's eyes? the library sinking into the Tigris, the fleas on a grain cart that killed half of Europe. They're all the same story. That's the thing about history. You can't separate the glory from the horror. They come wrapped in the same cloth. I will return. The French Revolution began with hope and ended with the guillotine. Every age ends. I do not. I have walked through 1,000 years of this world. I will walk through 1,000 more. To be immortal is to attend your own funeral over and over again. As always, I will see you in the past.